Okay, today we're going to introduce a new concept that is going to help you understand the economy of today and the economy of the future. It is called the asset economy. All right, so one of the biggest changes in the economy in the last 20, 30 years has been an enormous increase in asset prices. That is most visible in house prices, but it's important to understand that it's actually happened in pretty much all assets. There's been a massive increase in stock prices, there's been a massive increase in land prices, there's been a massive increase in the gold price. And while I'm filming this in London, there's been a lot of focus in the UK on London. It's important to realize that increase has been pretty much international. We've seen a big increase in house prices and stock prices all over Europe, the US, all over the Western world. Now, this is what I call the asset economy. The reason I call it this is because asset prices have increased enormously in the last 30 years and wages have only increased a bit, we have moved into a new kind of economy where increasingly the work that you do is not really that important for determining how rich you are. Increasingly, the only thing that matters is how many assets your family has. I think the best way to explain this is probably through giving an example. So if you are living here in London and you make 70, 80 grand, so 2-3 times average income, so you've got a really good job, a really good wage, increasingly it is almost impossible to buy a property without being able to get some significant help from your family, unless you can get a big cash gift from your parents, or at the very least have a long period of staying with your parents and not having to pay rent. On the flip side, if you are from a very wealthy family, what you will see is even if you have a pretty average paying job, 20, 30 grand, a lot of people from those kinds of families can quite easily buy property because they can get big gifts, £500,000, £600,000 from their family. So what that means is, increasingly we're in a situation where basically for determining how rich you are, the kind of job you have, the kind of degree you have, increasingly doesn't really matter. All that really matters is how many assets your family has. So we're moving away from an economy where your financial outcomes for you as an individual, for your family, were primarily determined by your job and your salary. And we've moved towards an economy where the financial outcomes for individuals are increasingly overwhelmingly determined by the amount of assets a family has. Now, in other videos, I've referred to this concept as the end of capitalism. What I mean when I say that was, my parents and my grandparents, they lived in a world where really, regardless of your background, if you were willing and able to work really hard, you could save up some money, buy a house. If you're willing to work really, really hard, you can even get rich. Increasingly for my generation and for future generations, that will be impossible. So we've moved away from this kind of capitalistic idea of meritocracy, work hard, get rich. We're moving towards really an economy which is primarily about inherited wealth. I've called this a new feudalism. We're moving into an economy which is an asset economy. You can only be rich if you are born rich. If you are born poor, you will definitely die poor. Now, in my opinion, this is the biggest economic trend of the last 20, 30 years. It's going to continue. So if you want to understand the economy of today and the future, you need to understand the asset economy. Next step, how did we get here? How did we move into an asset economy? Now, this is actually what I wrote my thesis on this when I was at Oxford. This is actually the thing I've looked at most in my time as an economist. So it's something I'm really interested in. I'm really happy to be able to explain it. The reason that we've moved into an asset economy is because of the massive increase in wealth inequality in the last 30 years. This has happened for a few different reasons. The three main reasons I would point out is, number one, massive decreases in the effective tax rates of the very rich in the 80s under the Thatcher government here in the UK and the Reagan government in the 80s. The increased integration between Western economies like UK, Europe, US, and much more unequal economies like India or particularly China. And thirdly, the mismanagement of massive crises like the 2008 crisis and the COVID crisis in such a way that they led to massive increases in wealth for the very rich. And that's something I've talked about a lot on this channel. So once you have a massive increase in the wealth of the very rich, what that means is you get a very rich class that has a huge amount of assets, and they have huge amounts of passive income. So we always use as our example Rishi Sunak. He's worth about 700 or 800 million pounds. He will generate passive income every year of something like 20, 30 million pounds. Very rich people with big passive incomes, they tend to use the vast majority of those incomes to buy the rest of the assets. What that means is all of this money trying to buy assets, it pushes asset prices up. Those super rich buy the assets of the middle class, which makes them even richer, which pushes asset prices up even more. So because of the dynamics of this, once the rich get very rich, they buy more assets, which makes them richer, which means they buy more assets still. What you get is a spiraling nature. So the rich will get richer, and over time, the middle class will increasingly lose their assets, which means asset prices will go up and up and up, wages will go down and down. If you want to know more about this, you can watch our video, How Wealth Inequality Affects the Economy. But the primary thing you need to understand is, once the rich get very rich, asset prices go up, ordinary families lose their wealth, and this gets worse and worse over time. So understanding the asset economy will help you predict the future, because the asset economy is going to be more and more what the future looks like. Part 3, what does the asset economy mean for you, for your family? So I think the number one consequence of an asset economy is that upward social mobility becomes almost impossible. And the reason for that is quite obvious, right? Because as asset prices go up and up and up, up and up and up, much faster than your wages, it simply becomes impossible to buy assets with your wages. And that means that unless you already have assets, you can't get assets. Now, when I say social mobility is impossible, what I mean is it's basically impossible to move upwards in class. So if you look at a very small scale, if you consider two people from very poor families, if one of them gets a 30 grand a year job and one of them gets a 60 grand a year job, that person with a much higher salary will be able to live a more comfortable life, but it will not be enough to be able to buy assets and move up into a permanently higher asset owning position for them and their family in the long run. So if we only look at ourselves and people in a very similar situation to us, it looks like a meritocracy. But once you start looking at yourself and people born with higher wealth, you realize it becomes impossible to move up. So upward social mobility basically ceases to exist. And you're already seeing this massively now. When I look at the people around me in my life, almost everybody my age is at pretty much the exact same position in the financial hierarchy as their parents were. And that is because the most important thing that matters is what assets you inherit from your parents. The other side is, okay, if upward social mobility is impossible, what about downward social mobility? Well, what happens when you have an asset economy is that asset prices go up and up and up and up and up. We still do have a decently sized property-owning middle class in this country. It's largely older people. And these older people find themselves in a situation where there is a massive financial incentive for them to sell their assets, because they're sitting on a house that might be worth 500, 600 grand. Living is becoming more difficult. So if they sell that property, they can have a much more comfortable retirement. It looks like they can support their family in their living conditions. Now, this reminds me of a Bible story that I was taught when I was a young kid, about a guy called Esau, who he was a very strong guy. He was a hunter. He was the eldest son of his family, and he was about to get his inheritance. One day he came home very, very hungry, really starving, and his younger brother, not sure his name, Jacob maybe, said to him, "Listen, I'll give you this food if you let me take your inheritance." And the guy was super hungry, so he gave it away. And then, in trade for being able to enjoy the moment, he lost his basically family's wealth from his side of the family. And this is the situation that older people are finding themselves in now. They are seeing prices go up, but at the same time, their house price is going up. And they're thinking, well, that's okay. I'm making loads of money on the house. If I sell the house, I can live a comfortable life. They, of course, grew up not in the asset economy, in a worker's economy. And they think, well, it's okay because my kids will be able to work hard and buy properties of their own. In reality, because we are in an asset economy now, when the older generation of the middle class sell their property, their kids and their grandkids will never be able to buy property again. So what you see is as the richer get richer and richer and richer, more and more of the middle class start to drop away as they sell their assets to the rich. And ultimately, inevitably, if the rich are buying the assets, they must be getting them from somewhere. And this is because people in the middle class are dropping off. So the way it affects you is that we are moving into a world where if your family has no assets, they will never have assets. Which means upward social mobility is becoming impossible. But increasingly, as the rich get richer and richer, they take the assets of the middle class, which means inevitably my grandkids and your grandkids, unless you are Rishi Sunak, I don't know if you watch my videos, your grandkids will be poor. So next we're going to talk about how this looks from the perspective of the old and the perspective of the young, because I think it looks very, very different from both of those perspectives. Now, older people who in many cases own property, they often look at the asset economy and they see their house price going up and up and up, and they think, happy days, you know, I'm really rich. Well done me for being so smart to buy property. I'm doing really, really well. And they use that money to pay for their retirement, and they sell the property and then they live a good life. And they think it's going to be okay because they read stories in the newspapers saying, listen, don't worry. As long as your kids pull their socks up and stop buying avocado toast and stop going to Starbucks, things will be fine. I think it's really important for older people, any older people watching these videos, any older people in your life, that you explain to them, listen, if you sell that property, which is the only way you can actually enjoy the increase in house price, your kids and grandkids will never own property. That is what the asset economy is. If you take a long-term look at history, you will see for most of history, people born poor cannot ever buy assets or property. If you sell your property now, as we move back into asset economy, your family will be poor forever. So older people who might be happy at seeing house prices going up, please consider the consequence of this is poverty for your family for the rest of time. Okay, so how does it look from the perspective of the young? Now, this is something that I really want to talk about because I think it's really important. Now, we still live with this kind of age, this idea in our society that we live in a meritocracy. You know, we believe that if you work hard, if you save up, if you study hard, you can get rich. In reality, as we move into the asset economy, it is increasingly difficult, approaching impossible, for anybody born in a poor family to ever become truly rich in the sense of owning assets. I think this creates a very, very difficult situation for the mental health of young people. We're telling young people, listen, if you don't make money, it's because you're lazy or because you're dumb. If you can't get rich, it's because you're lazy, it's because you're dumb. And we're giving them a situation where if they're born into the wrong family, it is impossible for them to get rich. And why is it impossible for them to get rich? Well, the reason is, like we said before, even if you're earning a good salary, imagine you're earning 80 grand, you have to pay tax on all of your salary. At the top end, you're paying above 50% when you include national insurance. You save up as much as you can after tax, and you're able to save maybe 10, 15 grand a year. When you go to buy a property, you are competing with young kids from richer families who are getting gifts from their parents of 400, 500, 600 grand cash. That is the equivalent of you saving your after-tax income for 50 years, even if you are on 2 or 3 times the national average. So we are telling young people, if you fail, it's your fault, and we are making it impossible for them to succeed. And I think this is creating, in many cases, a mental health crisis for young people. So I want to send a message out here to young people, especially young people from poor or ordinary backgrounds, okay? If you are feeling like you are poor and other people around you are rich, that is not your fault. You have been given a system where it is impossible for people born into poor families to get rich. So if you're not happy about that, you need to come and help us change the system. You know, that is what this channel is here for. If the system as it is continues, people from poor families will never be able to escape poverty. This is not your fault. This is a system that makes it impossible for you. Support us and help us change that system. Now, the very last point, which is something I think that is super, super interesting, which is in the asset economy, for very sensible, understandable reasons, people and families become very, very protective of their assets. And that is because if you are a family in an asset economy with no assets, your whole family, your descendants forever are consigned to definite poverty. So obviously you want to protect your assets as much as you can, because you know if you lose those assets, then your family is going to be devastated forever. And what that leads to is actually people doing things which are actually very counter their interests. For example, many people, because they are very protective of their own assets, will, for example, oppose things like wealth taxes, which we support on this channel. And once you understand the asset economy, you can totally understand why they're doing that. They're sitting there thinking, oh my God, if I lose these assets, then my family is going to be devastated. So I absolutely have to protect these assets. And in so doing, they oppose increasing taxation on the richest. And remember that the wealth of the rich is growing and growing and growing. And if you don't do anything about that, it is inevitable that they will outcompete the middle class for assets in the long term. It's a little bit like if we're sitting here in this room and there's a massive balloon that is growing and growing and growing at an accelerating rate, and it's starting to squash us all, taking up all the oxygen in the room, and we're sitting here with a little balloon in our pocket saying, we can't do anything that will hurt balloons. You see, if you don't do anything about this massively spiraling growing wealth of the very rich, remember, just Rishi Sunak alone gets a passive income of £40 million, they will inevitably take all the assets in the long term. That means we will lose our middle class and we will end up as a country which is filled with poverty. The only way to protect the middle class is to keep the wealth of this country flowing through the country generation after generation. If you allow the rich to slowly accumulate and grow and take all of the wealth, it is inevitable that ordinary families will lose theirs in the long term. But at the same time, I'm very understanding of why people want to protect their wealth. And that is why on this channel, we always make it very clear, look, we're not trying to tax ordinary working people, even if you might be a doctor, a lawyer, or heaven forbid, a banker. We are out here trying to tax very, very wealthy families with wealth of 10, 100, £1 billion. Super, super wealthy families. These are the guys who, if you don't tax them, their wealth will grow, and over the long run, they will end up taking the wealth of the middle class. So if you allow the super rich to grow their wealth forever, unless you already are super rich, you will lose your wealth in the long run and your kids will be poor. The only way to protect working people in this country, including asset owners, is to keep wealth flowing around. So listen, I would encourage you, even if you do have wealth of your own, you need to support greater taxation of the rich and the super rich. If you do not, then they will take your wealth. The only way to protect your wealth is to stop the super wealthy from taking it. And if you allow them to accumulate more and more wealth without paying any tax, it is inevitable that they will do that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. The asset economy. This is a theory which I've used to help me understand the economy for a long time. I've made a lot of money of it. I think most economists don't understand it. If you understand it, I think you can have a really good understanding of what's happening. Most important thing to understand, it will get worse. Asset prices will go up, the rich will get richer, the middle class will become dispossessed, and that includes you, So I would encourage you, whether you are from a poorer background or whether you are from a middle class background, support this channel, get behind us, support us, follow us and everything we've got. What have we got now? TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, of course. Do we have anything else? Yeah, follow it, share this video, because if we don't stop this, the situation gets worse. I don't want it to happen. Hopefully you don't want it to happen. If you are Rishi and you're watching these videos, thank you all for your support. Otherwise, we need to stop it because it's the only way to support our futures and our families. Thank you. Money currently is flowing from the government to the rich, leaving the government with big piles of debt and the rich with big piles of money. There is one other thing they can do with that massive amount of income. They can buy your mum's house.